The Galactic Council had been watching Earth for 3 standard cycles now. Ambassador Crick-7 stood at the observation deck of the orbital station, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he studied the blue planet below. He had seen many worlds. He had studied many species, but humans confused him in ways no other race ever had. "They should be dead," he said to his assistant, a small Velian named Tora. "By all our calculations, they should have gone extinct at least 47 times in their recorded history." Tora checked her data pad. 49 times, Ambassador. We updated the projections last cycle. Crick-7 made a sound of frustration. His species, the Mordane, were masters of prediction. They could look at any developing civilization and tell you exactly when it would rise, when it would peak, and when it would fall. They had been doing this for over 100,000 years. They had never been wrong. Until humans. "Show me the latest incident," Crick-7 ordered. The main screen flickered to life. It showed a human settlement on a world called New Havana, a colony established just 20 years ago. The planet had seemed perfect for human life when they landed. Breathable air, clean water, good soil. The Mordane had given the colony a 94% chance of success. Then the burning season came. The screen showed massive fires sweeping across the continent. The local plant life, it turned out, released flammable gases during certain parts of its reproductive cycle. When summer came and temperatures rose, the entire forest became a bomb waiting to go off. A single lightning strike set half the planet ablaze. "Standard evacuation protocol would suggest immediate withdrawal," Tora said. "The fires will burn for at least 3 more months. The air quality is already fatal without breathing equipment." "And yet," Crick-7 said, leaning forward, "look at them." The humans were not evacuating. Instead, they were doing something the Mordane had never seen before. They were adapting. In the first week, they had dug underground. Not simple bunkers, but entire tunnel systems connecting every building in the settlement. They had figured out that the fire could not burn below the soil, and they had responded by moving their entire civilization down. In the second week, they had built air filtration systems using parts from their own ships. They had taken apart vehicles, communication arrays, and even some of their farming equipment. A human engineer named Maria Santos had designed a filter that could clean the toxic air using nothing more than local minerals and salvaged electronics. She had worked for 60 hours straight without sleep, and when someone suggested she rest, she had simply asked for more coffee. In the third week, they had started farming underground. They had brought light systems down from the surface. They had created hydroponic gardens. They had even begun breeding a new type of food crop that could grow in the dim light of their tunnels. A team of botanists had mixed genetic material from Earth plants and local specimens to create something entirely new. "They lost 60% of their population in the first 3 days, Tora said quietly. 12,000 humans died. "And the survivors?" Crick-7 asked. "They held funerals, then they went back to work." Crick-7 watched as the humans moved through their underground world. They had lost everything they had built on the surface. Their homes were ash. Their farms were smoke. Their dreams of a new world had literally burned to nothing. And they were still going. A human woman appeared on screen. She was carrying a child on her back and a bag of tools in her hands. Her face was covered in soot and her clothes were torn. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond simple tiredness, but she was smiling. "What is she doing?" Crick-7 asked. "According to our translators, she is explaining to her child how to identify safe water sources in the tunnel system. She is also teaching the child a song about the different types of rocks they have found underground." "A song about rocks?" "Yes, Ambassador. Humans appear to create songs about everything. We have recorded over 40,000 new songs from this colony since the fires began. They sing while they work. They sing while they eat. They sing to their children at night. Our cultural analysts are deeply confused by this behavior." Crick 7 was confused too. When the Mordane faced disaster, they calculated, they analyzed, they found the optimal solution and implemented it. They did not sing. But the humans did, and somehow, against all logic, it seemed to help them. The screen shifted to show another part of the settlement. A group of humans were gathered around a large table. They were drawing on paper with charcoal sticks, sketching out plans for something Crick 7 did not recognize. The oldest among them was perhaps 70 years old. The youngest was barely 12. They were all contributing ideas. "What are they building?" he asked. Tora checked her data. "They call it a sky bridge. They intend to create a network of covered pathways that will connect their underground homes to observation points on the surface. The design incorporates heat shielding made from local clay and cooling systems powered by underground streams. That technology does not exist." "No, Ambassador, it does not. They are inventing it." Crick 7 felt something he rarely felt: doubt. The Mordane were the oldest species in the Council. They had seen civilizations rise and fall for millennia. They knew how the universe worked. They knew that species adapted over generations, slowly and carefully, through natural selection and gradual change. Humans did not seem to understand this rule. When faced with a problem, they did not wait for evolution to solve it. They did not accept their situation and die gracefully. They simply decided to change, and then they did. "Ambassador," Tora said, "there is something else you should see." The screen changed again. Now it showed a different world entirely. This was Kelvin 8, a frozen planet on the outer edge of human space. The humans had established a research station there just 5 years ago. "What happened here?" Crick 7 asked. The local sun entered an unexpected cooling phase. Surface temperatures dropped by 40 degrees in less than a week. Our models predicted complete loss of the station within 3 days. "And the humans?" "They are alive, Ambassador, all of them." The screen showed the research station, now barely visible under mountains of snow and ice. But there were lights glowing inside. There was movement. There were humans walking around in suits they had clearly modified themselves, adding extra layers and heating elements that had not been part of the original design. They built heating suits from their own equipment. Better than that, Ambassador. They discovered that the ice on Kelvin 8 contains a chemical compound that produces heat when combined with human waste. They have created a sustainable heating system using nothing but ice and their own biological byproducts. Crick 7 made a sound that might have been a laugh. They heated their station with their own waste. "Yes, Ambassador. They found it quite amusing. They have already named the system the Hot Mess and have begun improving the design for potential use on other frozen worlds. One scientist has written a paper about it that has been downloaded over 3 million times on the Human Information Network." The Mordane ambassador stood in silence for a long moment. He looked at the frozen station on Kelvin 8. He looked at the burning world of New Havana. He looked at Earth itself, that small blue planet that had produced the most confusing species in galactic history. "Pull up the adaptation records," he finally said. "All of them. I want to see everything." Tora nodded and began accessing the files. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands. Every world humans had touched, they had changed. Every challenge they had faced, they had overcome, not through superior technology, not through ancient wisdom, not through biological advantages. Through adaptation. Pure, stubborn, impossible adaptation. And Crick 7 was beginning to realize that the Mordane's predictions had not failed because they were wrong. They had failed because they had never accounted for a species that simply refused to die. The council chambers were full for the first time in decades. Representatives from all 63 member species had gathered to discuss what they called the human question. Crick 7 stood at the speaker's platform, his data pad loaded with evidence that would change the galaxy's understanding of civilization itself. "Honored members," he began, "I have spent 3 cycles studying humanity. What I have found is unlike anything in our records." The chamber buzzed with interest. The Mordain were known for their calm analysis. For Crick 7 to call something unusual was itself unusual. "Let me show you what I mean." He activated the main display. The screen filled with a world covered in purple vegetation. "This is Gamma Velorum 4. 22 years ago, humans established an agricultural colony here. The soil seemed fertile. The climate seemed stable. Our projections gave them an 87% chance of becoming a major food producer for human space." He paused for effect. 6 years after landing, they discovered that the local plants produced a toxin that slowly accumulated in human tissue. Anyone who ate food grown in that soil would die within 10 years. The toxin was too subtle to detect in early testing. By the time they realized the danger, every colonist had already been exposed. The Kelix representative, a tall being with transparent skin, leaned forward. "So they abandoned the colony." "No," Crick 7 said, "they changed themselves." The screen shifted to show medical data, diagrams of human bodies, charts of biological modifications. The complexity of what the humans had done was staggering. A human scientist named Dr. James Okonkwo developed a treatment that altered the human digestive system. Within 2 generations, the colonists had evolved the ability to safely process the toxin. They did not change their world. They changed their bodies to fit it. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Deliberate biological modification was considered dangerous by most species. The Telrath had nearly destroyed themselves attempting something similar. The Vorics had been banned from the Council for experimenting with it. "This is reckless," the Vorics representative said. "They could have caused genetic damage that would affect their entire species." "They did," Crick 7 admitted. "The modification spread beyond Gamma Velorum 4. It is now present in approximately 12% of all humans. Those affected cannot safely eat food from Earth's original ecology without taking supplements." And they accepted this. They celebrated it. They created a holiday called New Gut Day where they eat traditional foods from both Earth and Gamma Velorum 4. They consider it a mark of their adaptability. They even have a saying about it: different stomachs for different worlds. The Kelix representative made a sound of disgust. They treat genetic modification as a festival. They treat everything as a festival, honored delegate. Humans have created holidays celebrating disasters, defeats, plagues, and extinctions. They seem to believe that any event they survive is cause for celebration. They have a holiday for the day a plague killed half of one continent. They have another for the day a massive rock nearly destroyed their entire planet. They remember their tragedies by celebrating their survival. Crick 7 changed the display again. This time it showed a world of vast oceans and tiny islands. "This is Aquaria Major, settled 34 years ago. The humans chose this world knowing it was almost entirely water. They believed they could farm the seas and build floating cities." "Could they?" the Telrath representative asked. "Not at first. The local sea creatures were extremely aggressive. Dozens of humans were killed in the first year alone. The floating platforms they built were constantly attacked. Traditional human weapons proved ineffective underwater. The creatures were too fast, too numerous, and too intelligent to be defeated by force." He showed video footage. Massive creatures with dozens of tentacles were attacking a human structure. The scene was chaos. People were screaming, metal was tearing, blood was spreading through the water. Then the footage changed. The same creatures were now swimming peacefully alongside human divers. They were carrying cargo. They were pulling boats. They were, impossibly, cooperating. "What happened?" someone asked. "A human child happened," Crick 7 said. "A 7-year-old girl named Lily Chen fell into the water during an attack. She should have been killed immediately. Instead, She looked at the creature attacking her and laughed. She laughed at a predator. She thought it was funny looking. Human children have strange standards of humor. The creature, which had never encountered this response before, became confused. It did not kill her. It investigated her. And Lily, being a human child, tried to pet it. The chamber was silent. Within 1 year, Lily Chen had established basic communication with the creatures. She had learned their sounds and movements. She had figured out what they wanted and what they feared. Within 3 years, she had trained them to respond to simple commands. Within 10 years, the entire ecology of Aquaria Major had been transformed into a cooperative system where humans and sea creatures worked together. That should not be possible, the Vorax representative said. Those creatures are apex predators. They have no natural inclination toward cooperation. Humans do not care what is natural, Crick 7 replied. They care what is useful, and they had discovered that cooperation was more useful than conflict. They did not defeat the creatures. They befriended them. He pulled up more data. Since then, humans have repeated this pattern on 17 different worlds. They find hostile species, they study them, they figure out how to communicate, and then they make friends. Friends. That is what they call it. They have befriended carnivorous plants on Theta Cygni. They have befriended silicon-based life forms on the mineral worlds. They have even befriended a species of intelligent gas on Nebula Station 7, despite having no physical way to interact with it. They developed a system of light pulses and pressure changes to communicate. It took them 8 years, but they did it. The Mordain ambassador paused, letting his words sink in. Honored members, I have studied over 2,000 incidents of human adaptation. I have analyzed their history, their biology, their psychology, and their culture, and I have reached a conclusion that I never expected to reach. He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Humans should not exist. By every measurement we use to evaluate species viability, they should have died out millennia ago. They come from a planet that tries to kill them constantly. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no claws. They cannot survive in extreme temperatures. They cannot breathe underwater. They cannot fly. He let the list hang in the air. And yet they have spread across more than 1,000 worlds. They have survived conditions that killed older, stronger, more advanced species. They have not only survived, they have thrived. How, the Kelix representative asked. What makes them different? Crick 7 turned off the display. He looked at the assembly with all 4 of his eyes. They adapt, not over generations, not over centuries. They adapt every single day. When the world changes, they change with it. When they cannot change the world, they change themselves. When they cannot change themselves, they change their tools. When they cannot change their tools, they change their thinking. He pulled up one final image. It showed a human sitting on a rock on an alien world, surrounded by strange plants and stranger creatures. The human was eating something that looked like it should have been poisonous. He was wearing clothes made from materials that did not exist on Earth. He was talking to a creature that should have been his predator. And he was smiling. This is what victory through adaptation looks like, Crick 7 said. Not a single great achievement, not a monument or a weapon or a conquest. Just a species that refuses to stop changing, refuses to stop learning, refuses to stop trying. He shut down the display entirely. I recommend we adjust our classification of humanity from developing species to persistent threat. The chamber erupted. The news of Crick 7's recommendation spread across the galaxy within hours. Some species were outraged. Some were terrified. Some were simply confused. The communication networks of 100 worlds buzzed with debate about what to do with humanity. On Earth, the reaction was typically human. They laughed. Admiral Sarah Chen, no relation to Lily, though she had heard the story 1,000 times, sat in her office at Fleet Command and read the Galactic Council's report. Her staff had translated the relevant sections, and she had to admit that the Mordane ambassador had done his homework. "Persistent threat," she said aloud. "I kind of like that." Her aide, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, the Council is debating sanctions. Some of the more conservative species want to quarantine human space entirely." "Let them debate," Chen said. "What are they going to do, build a wall around 1,000 star systems?" "The Vorix have suggested exactly that, ma'am." Chen laughed again. It was becoming a habit. The Vorix can barely agree on what to have for lunch. They're not going to coordinate a project that big. She stood up and walked to her window. From here, she could see the Pacific Ocean stretching out to the horizon. Somewhere out there, beneath the waves, was the original site of Aquaria Major's sister project, an underwater city that had been growing for the past 2 decades. "Do you know why they're really afraid of us, Marcus?" "Because we adapt too quickly." "No, because we adapt at all." She turned to face him. "Every other species in the galaxy evolves on their homeworld, builds their civilization, and then expands outward. They bring their homeworld with them wherever they go. They terraform planets to match what they know. They recreate their ecology, their climate, their way of life. And we don't. We can't. Earth is too diverse. We never had one way of life to begin with. Every continent, every climate zone, every ecosystem taught us something different. We learned to adapt before we ever left the cradle. Our ancestors crossed deserts and mountains and oceans. They lived in jungles and tundras and everything in between. Adaptation is not something we do. It is what we are." She pulled up a display showing human colonies across the galaxy. Each one was different. Some were underground, some were underwater, some floated in gas giants, some clung to asteroids. No two looked alike. The Mordane built their empire by finding worlds that matched their needs perfectly. When they couldn't find them, they made them. They've been doing it for 100,000 years, and in all that time, they've only settled on about 3,000 worlds. We've settled over 1,000 in just 2 centuries. Exactly, because we don't wait for perfect. We work with what we've got. Marcus studied the display. "Admiral, permission to speak freely." "Go ahead." "If the Council decides we're a threat, what do we do?" Chen considered the question. It was a good one. The Galactic Council had been around for longer than human civilization. They had resources and technology that humanity could only dream of. If they decided to treat humanity as an enemy, things could get very bad very quickly. "We do what we always do," she finally said. "We adapt." She turned back to the window. "But I don't think it will come to that. You see, Marcus, the galaxy has never dealt with something like us before. They have models for warriors and traders and explorers and colonizers. They know how to handle empires and federations and alliances, but they don't have a model for a species that just fits. Fits. Everywhere, into everything. We don't conquer, we join. We don't destroy, we improve. We don't demand, we offer. And eventually, before anyone notices what's happening, we become essential." She smiled. "That's the real threat, Marcus. Not that we might fight them, but that someday they might realize they can't live without us." The Council's debate lasted for 3 standard cycles. During that time, humanity did not wait. On Burning World, as New Havana had been renamed, the underground cities had grown into something unprecedented. The humans had discovered that the ash from the surface fires contained nutrients that made their hydroponic crops grow faster. They had found that the toxic gases could be processed into fuel. They had even started breeding fire-resistant animals using genetic samples from Earth's deserts. What had been a disaster site was becoming a thriving civilization. Dr. Maria Santos, the engineer who had built the first air filters, had become something of a celebrity. Her designs were being used across human space, adapted for dozens of different toxic atmospheres. She had given up trying to keep track of all the modifications people had made. That's the thing about humans, she told a reporter from Earth News Network. We don't just solve problems, we share solutions, and then we improve them, and then we share them again. She was standing in a garden that should not have existed. Plants from Earth, Gamma Velorum 4, and 3 other worlds grew side by side in soil that had been created from burned forest and purified toxins. Children were playing among the flowers, children who had been born underground and had never seen an unfiltered sky. "Don't you miss the surface?" the reporter asked. Santos considered the question. "Sometimes, but you know what? My grandmother lived through the floods in Bangladesh. My grandfather survived an earthquake in Chile. My mother was born during a pandemic. Humans have always had to give things up to survive. What matters is what we build after." She gestured at the garden, at the children, at the lights glowing in the tunnel ceiling. "We build this, we build tomorrow, that's what we do." The reporter nodded. "There are people on Earth who think you should have evacuated. They say you're being stubborn." Santos laughed. "Stubborn, we prefer determined, or maybe creative. Or what's that word the Mordane keep using? Adaptive. We're being adaptive. And if the fires never stop, then we'll learn to use them. We've already started. Some of our engineers are working on heat capture systems. Some of our biologists are studying how the local plants survive the burning. Some of our artists are painting with ash." She shrugged. "Humans find a way. We always do." Meanwhile, on Aquaria Major, something even more remarkable was happening. The partnership between humans and sea creatures had evolved into something neither species could have imagined alone. Lily Chen, now in her 40s, had spent her entire adult life developing what she called the bridge. It was not a physical structure. It was a language, a way for humans and the ocean creatures to understand each other completely. The creatures, it turned out, were far more intelligent than anyone had realized. They had their own culture, their own history, their own dreams. They remembered things that had happened thousands of years ago. They passed down stories through generations. They had opinions about the weather and arguments about territory and jokes that humans still did not quite understand. "They're not pets," Lily explained to a delegation from the Galactic Council. "They're partners, equals, friends." The delegation struggled to comprehend this. The Mordane representative in particular seemed disturbed. "You have formed an alliance with a non-sentient species?" he asked. "They're sentient," Lily corrected. "Just different. They don't use tools, they don't build cities, they don't write things down, but they think, they feel, they make choices. That's sentience." "By what definition?" "By ours. We decided they were sentient, so they are. That's how it works." The Mordane representative sputtered. "You cannot simply decide that a species is sentient." "Why not? Someone decided we were sentient once. Someone looked at our ancestors, small, weak, defenseless creatures hiding from predators, and decided that we had potential. Well, we're returning the favor." She gestured at the water, where dozens of the massive creatures were swimming peacefully alongside human divers. "Besides," she added with a smile, "they're much better company than most of the people I know." 6 months later, the Galactic Council voted on Crick 7's recommendation. It failed. Not because the Council decided humanity wasn't a threat. They absolutely believed humanity was dangerous, but they couldn't agree on what to do about it. The Vorics wanted isolation, the Kellics wanted integration, the Telrath wanted observation, the younger species wanted trade agreements, the older species wanted nothing to do with humans at all. The debates went in circles. The votes were split. The committees formed subcommittees and the subcommittees formed working groups. In the end, they did what councils throughout history have done when faced with problems too big to solve. They formed another committee. The Committee for Human Relations was given a simple mandate: figure out what to do about humanity. They were given unlimited resources, access to all council data, and a deadline of 10 standard cycles. They never made it. 3 cycles in, the committee discovered something that changed everything. Something that made all their debates and discussions completely irrelevant. Humans had already adapted to the Galactic Council. They had studied the Council's laws, politics, economics, and culture. They had learned every language, mapped every trade route, and analyzed every power structure. And then, quietly, patiently, persistently, they had started integrating. Human traders were doing business with over 40 Council species. Human diplomats had established unofficial relationships with independent worlds. Human scientists were collaborating on research projects across the galaxy. Human entertainers were performing on worlds that didn't even have compatible atmospheres. Human engineers were fixing problems that other species had given up on. They hadn't waited for permission. They hadn't asked for acceptance. They had simply started becoming part of the galactic community, one adaptation at a time. Crick 7, who had been appointed to the committee, discovered the truth during a routine inspection of a Mordane trade station. He found humans working there. Not as visitors, as employees. "How long have you been here?" he asked a young woman named Jessica Park. "About 2 years, Ambassador. The station manager hired me to help with their supply logistics." "You work for the Mordane." "I work with the Mordane," she corrected gently. "I also work with the Telrath Shipping Consortium and the Kelix Mining Guild. I'm what you might call a freelance adapter." "A what?" Jessica smiled. "I help different species figure out how to work together. You'd be surprised how many problems come from simple misunderstandings about how different species think. The Mordane are very literal. The Telrath communicate through color changes that humans can't see. The Kelix have trouble with the concept of individual ownership. I bridge those gaps." Crick 7 felt a familiar confusion settling over him. "How did you learn to do this?" "Same way we learn everything, Ambassador. We tried things until something worked." She pulled up a display showing her work history, dozens of species, hundreds of projects, thousands of problems solved. "We have a saying on Earth," she added, "if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. I try a lot of stupid things. Sometimes they work." "This is what we do," she said. "We fit in, we find a place, we make ourselves useful, and eventually we become essential." The ambassador looked at her with new eyes. This woman was not a conqueror. She was not a warrior or a diplomat or a spy. She was just a human doing what humans do. Adapting. And in her small way, she was conquering the galaxy more effectively than any army ever could. Crick 7 returned to the council with a new recommendation. It was simpler than his first one, and far more frightening. "We cannot contain humanity," he told the assembly. "We cannot isolate them. We cannot predict them. We can only adapt to them." The irony was not lost on him. "They are not like us," he continued. "They do not think in centuries or millennia. They think in days and weeks. They do not build for eternity. They build for tomorrow. They do not conquer worlds. They convince worlds to let them stay." He pulled up one image. It was a photograph taken on a small moon orbiting a gas giant in the outer arm of the galaxy. The moon had no atmosphere, no water, no resources worth mining. It should have been completely useless. But there was a human standing on it. He was wearing a suit that had been cobbled together from parts of at least 6 different species' technology. He was standing next to a structure that looked like it had been built from lunar rock and salvaged metal. He was holding a sign that read "First" in human letters. And he was, of course, smiling. "This photograph was taken 3 days ago," Crick 7 said. "The human's name is Tom Cooper. He traveled to this moon for no reason other than to say he was the first person there. He has already started building a small shelter and planting seeds in artificial soil he created from crushed rock and recycled nutrients." "Why?" someone asked. "Because he wanted to see if he could." Crick 7 shut off the display. "Honored members, I no longer recommend treating humanity as a threat. I recommend treating them as what they are, a natural force, like gravity, like time, like entropy itself." He paused. "You cannot fight a force of nature. You can only adapt to it." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the Kellics representative began to make a sound. It took Crick 7 a moment to recognize it. "Laughter. The human disease is spreading," the Kellics said. "You've caught it, Ambassador. You've started thinking like them." "Perhaps I have," Crick 7 admitted. "Perhaps that is the point." He looked around at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, species that had lived for millions of years, species that had built empires spanning thousands of worlds, species that had seen everything the universe had to offer. "Humanity has shown us something we never understood before," he said. "Survival is not about being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. It is about being the most willing to change. And humans change constantly, daily, hourly. They reinvent themselves with every challenge they face." He straightened to his full height. "This is what victory through adaptation looks like. Not a single triumph, but 1,000 small adjustments. Not a monument to glory, but a species that keeps getting up every time it falls down. Not the conquest of worlds, but the quiet, patient, unstoppable spread of beings who simply refuse to stop trying." He stepped down from the platform. "The humans have a saying: improvise, adapt, overcome. They treat it as casual advice, but I have come to believe it is the most dangerous philosophy in the galaxy." He walked toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one final time. "Because it works." The council eventually reached a decision, though it took another 2 cycles. They classified humanity as a dynamic species of interest and established protocols for ongoing observation and limited cooperation. It was the best they could do. By then, humans had already spread to another 100 worlds. They had established trade relationships with 20 more species. They had developed new technologies by combining ideas from a dozen different civilizations. And they kept adapting. On New Havana, they had stopped calling it Burning World because they had learned to live with the flames. The underground cities grew into something beautiful. The fires on the surface became an annual event, celebrated with festivals and controlled burns that produced the nutrients their crops needed. The toxic air became a resource, processed into fuel that powered their entire civilization. The ash became art, mixed with local minerals to create pigments that glowed in the dark. They had not conquered the fire, they had made peace with it. On Aquaria Major, the partnership between humans and sea creatures evolved into something neither species could have imagined alone. The creatures gained access to human technology. The humans gained access to the depths of the ocean. Together, they built wonders, underwater cities that sparkled with bioluminescent light, farming systems that fed millions, research stations that mapped the ocean floor down to the last grain of sand. Lily Chen, her hair now gray but her eyes still bright, spent her days swimming with the creatures she had befriended as a child. She had learned their language so well that she sometimes dreamed in it. She had taught them human concepts, mathematics, music, the idea of writing things down. In return, they had taught her things that humans had never known: how to feel the pressure of deep water, how to sense the movement of distant storms, how to remember. "The ocean remembers everything," she told her grandchildren. "Every storm, every calm, every creature that ever lived, and now so do we." On Kelvin 8, the frozen research station became a thriving colony. The heating system that used biological waste was improved and exported to dozens of other cold worlds. The scientist who invented it, a man named Harold Jensen, became rich. He used the money to fund research into even more extreme environments. "If we can live here," he said, "we can live anywhere. That's the point. That's always been the point. There's no place in the galaxy that's truly hostile to humans. There are just places we haven't figured out yet." And on that small, useless moon orbiting a gas giant in the outer arm of the galaxy, Tom Cooper finished building his shelter. It wasn't much, just a pressurized dome with basic life support and a small garden. But it was his. He stood outside in his cobbled-together suit and watched the gas giant rise over the lunar horizon. It was beautiful in a way that no human had ever seen before. Purple and gold and orange, swirling with storms that had been raging for millennia. The light painted his suit in colors that did not exist on Earth. He had no reason to be here. No mission, no orders, no grand plan. He had just wanted to see something new, to prove that he could, to add one more small victory to humanity's endless record of adaptation. He pulled out a small camera and took a photograph. In it, he was smiling. He was always smiling. Because that was what humans did. They found the worst places in the galaxy, the most hostile environments, the most impossible challenges, and they smiled. Then they got to work. Tom spent the next 3 months improving his shelter. He found minerals in the lunar rock that could be processed into building materials. He discovered a way to capture ice from the moon's thin atmosphere. He invented a system for growing vegetables in soil that should not have supported life. When he finally left to return home, he left the shelter standing. He left instructions on how to maintain it. He left seeds and tools and supplies for anyone who might come after him. First doesn't mean only, he wrote in his final log entry. First means showing the way. 300 years later, historians from a dozen species would look back on this era and try to understand how humanity had done it. How a single species, younger and weaker than almost everyone around them, had become one of the most widespread and successful civilizations in galactic history. The answers they found were always the same. Humans adapted. Not perfectly, not gracefully, not always wisely, but constantly, persistently, stubbornly, impossibly. They changed their bodies to fit new worlds. They changed their societies to work with new species. They changed their technologies to solve new problems. They changed their very way of thinking to embrace new ideas. And whenever the galaxy threw something at them that should have destroyed them, they did something that no other species could quite understand. They looked at the challenge. They considered their options. They made a plan. And then, against all logic, against all probability, against all the predictions of the oldest and wisest species in the known universe, they won. Not through strength. Not through technology. Not through cunning or luck or divine intervention. Through adaptation. Pure, stubborn, beautiful, impossible adaptation. Every single day. The Mordane eventually updated their prediction models. It took them centuries to figure out how to account for human behavior, and even then, their predictions were only accurate about 60% of the time. But they learned something in the process, something that changed the way they looked at the universe. They learned that prediction was not enough, that the future was not fixed, that any species, no matter how small or weak or seemingly insignificant, could change the course of history simply by refusing to accept it. The Kellics learned too. They stopped laughing at humans and started studying them. They adopted some human practices, the concept of festivals, the idea of celebrating failure, the habit of singing while working. It made them stronger, more flexible, more likely to survive. Even the Vorix learned, though they would never admit it. They quietly dropped their proposals for quarantine. They started trading with human worlds. They even, in a few cases, allowed humans to live among them. And everywhere across the galaxy, the lessons of humanity spread. Adapt. Change. Try again. This is what victory through adaptation looks like, as Crick 7 had said, and he was right, and the most hopeful species the galaxy had ever seen. Because any species can conquer a world. Any species can build an empire. Any species can reach for the stars. but only humans could look at the infinite challenges of an infinite universe and say, with perfect confidence and a smile on their face, "We'll figure it out." And they always did. Always. Because that was what victory through adaptation actually looked like. Not a monument or a parade or a declaration of triumph. Just ordinary beings facing extraordinary challenges and refusing to give up. Just a species that had learned, through billions of years of struggle on a small blue planet, that the only way to survive was to keep changing. And so they did. Every day. In 1,000 small ways. On 1,000 different worlds. Until the galaxy itself began to adapt to them. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.